Welcome to section 3.2 of the Legal and Governance series. After discussing the modes of governance in the construction sector, we will now discuss the consequences in terms of innovation in the sector. In this micro lecture, we will first discuss innovation as a concept and how it is related to the governance that is found in the construction sector. We will then turn our attention to innovation theory. Innovation theory indicates the kind of conditions that play a role in bringing about innovation. Finally, we will pay attention to the question of whether there is a role for policy intervention in terms of improving innovation in the sector. There are 3 papers related to this micro lecture. We will not follow them one by one, but we will rather give an extensive summary of them or describe a common theme. Again, the idea is that you have been watching the session 3.1 on governance in the sector first. Before we start, it's good to have an idea of what we mean by the concept of innovation. Now, there are at least 3 different ways of how a company can innovate. The first one is, of course, the development of new products that have demand on the market and that can be sold. The second one is that you develop new technology in order to make those products. So it's not the products themselves, but the way how they are produced. And the third way is the development of new ways to actually produce them. And it can be a combination of new technology, but also the kind of activities that you employ in order to use them. So it's a combination of technology and way of operating that technology in producing the products. Now, why would you be doing this? 2 main reasons: improve the quality of the products or reduce the production costs. And again, that is done because you want to search a gain in market share, you want to be better than your competitors, or you might look for a gain in margins, in profit that you can make in order to buy the products that you sell and the costs that were involved in making them. Now, if we look at the current situation in the construction sector, the sector is in the different papers described as being rather conservative. So this means that there is not a lot of innovation going on. The innovation, the limited innovation that is there, is done on an individual level within companies, and that's of course related to the market conditions that are present. What is important also is that firms in the construction sector are usually rather small and operate only in a limited part of the market and sub-markets. For instance, if you compare that to car producing companies, they are much larger than the construction companies. And this also has implication for the resources that are available for innovation. Because if you are a small company, you have only limited resources that are available in terms of money, but also in terms of the expertise that is needed to innovate. Now, these limited resources are also the result of the fierce price competition that we find. So, in order to have money for innovation, you need margins and you need large profits. And of course, price competition, especially if it's very fierce, results in low margins and therefore low profits and not a lot of money available for innovation. There is limited use of innovation that you do because there are unique designs. We discussed that extensively. So it doesn't always pay off to innovate because the things that you develop for one type of building might not be usable for another building. We also discovered that there was, even within firms, limited learning. Now, another way of innovate would be not to do this within a specific company, but by collaborating together. Learning and collaboration between firms, and we also described in the previous micro lecture that not a lot of learning and collaboration between firms is actually taking place in the construction sector. Again, this is directly related to the market conditions and the different factors that play a role in explaining why these are dominant. So we learned that there is not a lot of innovation going on in the construction sector, and this is why we might pay attention to innovation theory. And innovation theory indicates under which conditions we might expect innovation to happen, and that might also be useful in thinking about how we can increase innovation. We will discuss a number of these theories, and the first one is that of technology push. The idea of this theory is that innovation is the result of investment in research and development. And because of these investments, new products might be developed or new production processes might be developed, because you do research into something new. If we look at the situation in terms of investments in the construction sector in research and development, we see that these investments are particularly very low. One of the papers describes them as being between 1/100th to 0.4% of turnover. And again, this is not very large. If you compare that to other industries, you will find that it's pretty common that, for instance, 3% of turnover is invested in research and development. So this is rather low in the construction sector. A number of factors play a role here that we already discussed in the previous slide. Firms are small, so there is not a lot of money available. The building process is very locally focused, and the buildings are very unique. The factors that we already discussed in terms of explaining the governance mode that is there, and they also play a role in the low availability of resources for technology push. Now, the second innovation theory starts from a different perspective, and it is called market pull. The basic idea of this theory is that the innovation is driven by the need of consumers for better products or for different products. So it doesn't start with research and development, but it starts with the demand that consumers have for certain products. And the producers that are able to meet this new demand, they will of course be able to produce those products, and they will gain a market share, and they will eventually survive. Now, this model only works if consumer demands are known to the producers. They know what the consumers want. And the particular characteristic of the construction sector is that the needs of the consumers, those people that buy the buildings that are going to be built, are first and foremost formulated in the design, in the architect that designs according to the wishes and demands of the client. So there is not a lot of contact between the consumer and the company that does the actual building process, because the design comes first and all the demands that are there are already indicated in the design. And we also already are aware of the fact that this results in unique buildings. And the uniqueness of the buildings, the building of prototypes, as we have been discussing, that really hampers the investment of construction companies in new and more innovative production processes. Because again, these production processes have to be flexible. They cannot be used over and over again building the same type of product. No, they have to be general, and if you invest in a very specific way of producing the buildings, then that might not be useful in a new design that is going to be developed in the next project. The previous two theories started from the idea that innovation is mainly done within single companies. Now, a third perspective is that innovation is the result of cooperation between different companies in knowledge networks. So for instance, there might be a lead company that combines knowledge and resources from different partners, and together they develop innovative products or ways of producing certain products. Now, of course, the development of these knowledge networks presumes durable relations between companies, and we've seen that this is difficult in construction. One of the reasons is that you need limits in terms of design variation. And of course, one way to do that is to involve not only production companies, but also design companies in the knowledge network. So if you would be able to cooperate with design firms together with the production firms, then there might be opportunities to develop knowledge networks that can innovate by working together. The next innovation theory takes us back to the single firm again in terms of the driver of innovation. And here the idea is that it is really about the innovation climate within the firm. So it's not about only investment in research and development or demand pull. No, it is also by the climate in the organization and whether it is focused on innovation or not. What you do need is larger firms, because only with a large scope of activities it's possible to invest a lot in innovation. So you need more hierarchy in the sector than is currently the case. Also, it's important that there is a willingness to invest in innovation. And in order to do that, you need, again, to have at least part of the design activities within the company. If design is really outside of the scope of the innovation company, then it is never attractive to invest a lot in innovation, and therefore the company will not be inclined to do such things. A final version of innovation theory starts from the idea that innovation can also be brought about by specific projects. You can develop specific projects that not only have the aim of producing a certain building, but also have the explicit aim to show that a certain innovation is possible and that show that the specific innovation is also attractive. So the goal of the building project is not only to meet the demands of the buyer of the product, but also another additional goal of the project is to show the attractiveness of the innovation that is used. If you're able to show the attractiveness, then this might convince the rather conservative actors that are working in the sector that there are real benefits to the innovation. And of course, then they will take over the innovation. At least that's the idea of the theory. Now, of course, it's important to understand that this depends on others in the construction sector and in both in the design and also by the buyers to accept these innovations as good ideas. If they don't accept it, then the innovation project just stands as a particular example of something that's really nice, but it's not very effective if it doesn't convince all the others that it's a good idea for them as well. After discussion innovation theory, it's time for our final subject of this micro-lecture, and that's the question if there is a role for policy intervention. Now, in general, there might be two reasons for government intervention. The first one is that the idea of innovation as such is a good thing. Countries usually would like their construction sector to be innovative because it has to compete on an international market, and because there is little innovation currently, they might have reason to increase innovation and to have a policy for that. The second reason for policy intervention might be that some of the innovation might be needed in order to solve other problems that governments face. For instance, sustainability is a large issue that is, for instance, related to the use of energy or the use of scarce resources, and for both questions the building sector is very relevant, and so you might need innovation in order for buildings to be less energy consuming or using less resources in terms of the building process. So that might be another reason for government policy in terms of bringing about innovation in the construction sector. Now, if we think about how we can develop policies that improve innovation, it's good to start from the innovation theories, because they will help you, and basically that's the main reason why we discuss them, that they can be useful in developing policy interventions. Now, the first theory that of technology push had the idea that investments in research and development are crucial. So if companies don't invest a lot in research and development, maybe government investments will help. And you see that many countries have research and development institutes where they invest in and where the knowledge that is produced by these institutes becomes available to the market parties. Of course, you might also invest in specific firms that are willing and able to develop new innovative ways of production. The second innovation theory had the idea that demand of consumers was crucial and that it's about the communication between buyers and producers in the sector that is actually limiting the innovation in the current situation. So here you might invest as a government in improving the communication between what people want and the construction sector that is building the buildings. The third perspective is that it is about networks and that the current lack of networks and the partnerships in innovation is hampering the possibilities for innovation. Again, you might define policies that try to convince companies in the building sector to move away from market coordination to network coordination. There is one important limit that plays a role here, is that there are currently quite a few regulations in the construction sector that are aiming rather for market conditions than network conditions. For instance, if you look at procurement law in the European Union, you will find that this is particularly aiming for markets to be there and not for networks. So it has a limited role specifically for governmental actors in terms of building durable partnerships in the construction sector. Because the basic aim of European regulation is that there are open markets and that there is fierce price competition, because the idea of the European Union is that that will reduce the production costs. A final way of formulating policies to stimulate innovation might be to go for innovation projects, and we've seen quite a few examples of that as well. There are different ways of doing that, and one way of doing that is, of course, that you, as a government, you are not only a regulator, but you are also a main buyer. Governmental organizations need buildings as well, and if they act as a buyer, they can, of course, aim for additional innovation in the buildings that are built for them, because they themselves can define the goals and the needs that are produced in those buildings. A second important role of policy actors is that the different policy sectors might also be play a major role in bringing about innovation. Again, we have the example of sustainability policy. It might be that sustainability policy has specific regulations that oblige companies to meet specific, for instance, energy regulations in terms of the buildings. So if there is a regulation that specifies that buildings have to be particularly energy efficient, that will drive innovation in the building sector, because they have to apply to these and meet the standards that are there and that are defined in terms of sustainability policy. So it's, so to say, a byproduct of sustainability policy that actors that are working in the construction sector have to innovate in order to meet the standards that are formulated there. Okay, it's time to wrap things up. We discussed in this micro lecture the innovation in the governance sector and the lack of innovation. So it's a conservative sector, and that is linked to the dominance of market governance and the uniqueness of the buildings that are being built. We also discussed innovation theory, 5 forms of it: technology push, market pull, the relevance of networks, within firm solutions, and innovation projects. And these different innovation theories, they can help defining the role for policy interventions. So in policy interventions can be linked to the different innovation theories, and of course the policy solutions that are found will depend on the innovation theory that you think is most relevant in terms of explaining the innovation in the sector.